Hi. Can you hear me okay? Cool. So welcome. I'm really excited to be here, and I want to start off by just telling you, I've got the big head now because Russ made me sound really important and exciting, but Sir Isaac Newton, I guess, in his footsteps. But my passion is teaching, and there are two areas in which I love teaching. The first is I teach first-year law students what we call lawyering skills and strategies at the University of Houston Law Center. Go Cougs! Whose house? Okay. And so I help give them the skills. What that means is I teach them to research and to write and to think like lawyers so that they can go out in the world and serve their clients and do good in the world. And I'm passionate about that. But I'm equally passionate about something that has nothing to do with my professional job, and that is pollinators. I love pollinators. So before I get into how to wildscape today, because I'm going to talk about how to transform your traditional home garden into a wildscape that invites pollinators, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about who these pollinators are and what their habits are, just a little bit. And so my teaching has two avenues, law and pollinators. And I'm here in that second capacity today. I would like very much to thank the Native Plant Society of Texas Houston chapter, the board, and this amazing committee that does this every year for inviting me and letting me get to geek out with you today, because I'm a little excited about pollinators. I want to point out two things to you in your packet. I have two flyers that go with my talk. So one of them says, front and back, online resources. Today I'm going to give you my top 10 tips on how to transform a garden into a wildscape and how to maintain it that way, while at the same time making your neighbors happy, being accepted. That's a big part of it. So you can see the resources are organized by tip, in addition to some general ones about wildscapes. I'm going to try, I'm a troglodyte, so my husband will probably do it. I'm going to try to put this up in document format so that people can hyperlink to those resources online on my educational Facebook community, about which I'll speak in a minute. These are my sources for my presentation. So I want you to know I may sound brilliant, but it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And also it's some of my own experience. Okay. The second thing is this flyer that says St. Julian's Crossing, our story. And thanks to Diana Foss, who's amazing, it even has pretty color pictures in it. And so that's just a sample of the flyers that I hand out to people to educate them about our wildscape. The photos that you see in here, not this one, a colleague took this, but the photos of all of the insects and all of the plants come from our gardens. Okay, so the biodiversity you're about to see is captured on a cell phone, in my gardens by me as I crawl around and garden. So just wanted you to know that. And my goal is to show you how you can have this biodiversity as well. So let's talk super briefly about why wildscape. This could be a whole week's conference. I'm just going to say it's super short and sweet. So the bottom line is pollinators are in trouble. They're in trouble. And there are multiple reasons for this. First and foremost, there's habitat loss because of human extension of our own habitat, and also the use of herbicides, especially in mass sprayings. So they're losing their habitat and thus losing the places where their larvae or they can survive. Places to nest and raise their young and places to feed. Also, climate change. So what happens is, as the temperatures go up and down, is that sometimes, for example, spring flowers that insects have co-evolved with as they hatch are blooming earlier and reaching their peak before they hatch. So this is a problem too. So that's also threatening them. Additionally, pesticides. And actually, home gardeners' use of pesticides is one of the causes of the decline. Remember that when we use pesticides, we not only get rid of bad bugs, but we get rid of good bugs too, because pesticides don't discriminate. They're equal opportunity killers. And then also parasites and disease. We've all heard about mites and other parasitic infestations in bumblebees and honeybees. So they're facing some serious problems. So how do we fix this? I'm a big believer in thinking globally but acting locally. And I am absolutely convinced, this is just me, that wildscaping our home gardens and little areas around our businesses and so forth is the answer to at least helping keep these critters alive and going and doing what we need them to do. Because about a third of our food products require pollination. I mean, just in a self-interested sense, right? So we replace the lost shelter and the lost food when we wildscape in our gardens and make it hospitable to these critters. And we also create little pockets, paths, stepping stones through larger urban areas like Houston, because some of these species can't fly very far. Some butterflies can fly very far, some bees not that far. So they need stepping stones so they're not just living in my little garden. They can move across our city. And some cities like London are doing this really well. So that's my soapbox. Now let's talk about some of these pretty creatures that are pollinators. So what pollinates? Well, the first thing that everyone, and by the way, this is from our gardens. That's amazing. Like, who knew that bees looked like this, right? Everyone knows that bees pollinate. In fact, they're adapted, they're evolved to do this very, very well because they have hair either on their legs or on their ventral abdomen. So there are over 4,000 species of native bee, and Michael Eckenfels can correct me, either in North America or in the United States. North America? North America. And in Texas alone, we have over 1,100 species of native bee. And guess what? The honeybee is not one of them. The honeybee comes from Europe or Africa. It was imported. It's become feral and wild, but it's not a native bee. Our native bees range in size, and I'm going to try and use this little device, again, troglodyte. You see this little guy in the middle? That's a base-banded furrow bee, Lasioglossum. You know what he's on? Frog fruit. That is a frog fruit. There's some frog fruit over there. It is tiny. This bee is just a few millimeters long. When I first saw them, I thought it was a gnat. I'm not kidding you. So we have little guys like that, and then we have bigger ones like carpenter bees and bumblebees that are about the size of your thumb tip. And then we have these gorgeous sweat bees, right? These iridescent green and blue. So they come in all shapes and sizes with longer tongues or shorter tongues. So that's bees. And in our gardens, again, as Russ said, I'm trying, because spare time, trying to catalog all the day feeding invertebrates in our gardens. I've been able to catalog over 25 species that I can identify at least by family or genus level in our gardens, now closer to 30. I just am teaching now, so I don't have time to catalog. Butterflies. We all know butterflies, and they're gorgeous, right? So we have big ones like monarchs and swallowtails. You see an example of a swallowtail right here. Isn't that lovely? And then you have teeny little ones like these little hair streaks. This one is feeding on a yarrow. Look how tiny that is. And they also feed on frog fruit. In our gardens, we have cataloged 36 species of butterfly. Moths. So a lot of these function at night. These are ones that I found in the day or that function during the day. Never forget the importance of moths. They pollinate at night. I don't have numbers, but I do have pretty pictures. Again, all from our gardens. Isn't that amazing? Who needs TV, right? Like, dude, this is awesome. Now, this is what got me. I had no idea before I started this journey in earnest a year and a half ago, I discovered that flies are also pollinators. And in fact, these two at the bottom, the two on the right here, and this top one are all in a family called hoverflies. I just gave a talk on syrphid or hoverflies at the local chapter of the Master Naturalist group. These are called the butterflies of the fly world. They're beautiful, all different shapes and sizes. And they're awesome because not only are they beautiful, but their little bodies rub up against the flowers as they feed, and they pollinate, and they are a hugely important part of pollinating. In addition, the larvae of some of them eat pests like whiteflies, mealybugs, aphids. These are your friends, and you want them. We've cataloged, I can identify 19 different species of hoverfly alone in our gardens. Wasps. So I used to chase them away because they ate my butterfly caterpillars, but no more. I am one with them. I love them. Wasps are my buds, right? Like, they don't have a lot of hair on them except for this little dude here. That's gorgeous. But they rub their little bodies against the flowers they feed, and they pollinate. They also keep away bad bugs. And in fact, most of them, the adults feed on nectar and pollen, mainly nectar. It's the larvae that they feed other insects. So don't get rid of them, embrace them, be one with them. And then the 4 Bs, beetles, bugs, bats, and hummingbirds. These are all pollinators as well. So here's the takeaway from that. The takeaway is pollinators come in all sorts of species, sizes, and shapes. They have different mouth parts, some with tongues, some without. Some are short and stubby, some are long and pointed. You have to plan your garden in such a way that you appeal to as many different types of pollinators as possible. That's the trick, and that's how we've gotten so biodiverse in a year and a half in our gardens. So let me tell you about the story of our garden, St. Julian's Crossing. So I'm a Catholic gal, so of course we had to have a patron saint for our gardens, and my husband suggested St. Julian the Hospitaller when we certified our garden as a Monarch Way Station with Monarch Watch. You can adopt the name, because he is the patron saint of travelers and innkeepers. And we consider the monarchs the travelers who stop off at the inn of our gardens. So that's that. Plus, Catholic gal, what can I say? So we bought our home in Oak Forest in 2000, and this is all you need to know about our original gardens. Okay? An invasive, non-native, St. Augustine-laden, non-productive, bush-toting garden. And it stayed this way with some changes. Of course, we didn't really think about feeding critters. It stayed this way until about, what, 4 years ago when we had the drought? Something like that, 2013, 12. And we went on a tough love policy with our gardens. So if it lived, it lived. If it died, it died. And we started replacing them in the spring of 2014. So we talked with our gardener and we said, you know, not only do we want low water plants, in other words, things that are drought tolerant, because we want to be responsible environmentally, but we also, butterflies are pretty, let's put some flowers in. So this was the result early on, and you can't really see it in much detail, but the bottom line is we didn't know what we were doing, and so a lot of those plants, they may have had flowers, but their nativars are cultivated species that didn't really feed critters. I mean, it was about 95% non-native, and there were also things like Loropetalum and this, what is that, a sago palm, which we no longer have, that didn't do anything for anything. I mean, the sago didn't even give shelter for critters. But here's the point I want you to keep in mind. You gotta start somewhere. So, you know, it's what people say about kids, right? If you want kids, if you wait until you're ready to have kids, will you ever have kids? You'll never have kids, because are we ever ready? No. It's a work in progress and a learning curve. So it is with Wildscape. So A for effort, we got it started. As time went on, the reason that I say considerations is I realized I needed help. So my other piece of free advice is find people who know what they're doing when you are like me and don't know what you're doing. So I met a group of friends who are bee enthusiasts. I got involved with the Oak Forest community of gardeners. A woman metaphorically took me under her wing. She's a butterfly wrangler, and she taught me about butterfly gardening. And then I started researching and realized you could get your garden certified. But to do that, I had to educate myself to see that I met the criteria. So this was a learning process. Again, you don't change things overnight unless you've won the lottery. You do it bit by bit. And so finally, this is our garden as of this year. This is maybe April of this year. So you can see our house is a little one-story under 1,600 square feet. The front lawn is not huge. That's about a third of it right there. So about a third of our yard now is garden. But here I would say at this phase we were about 30% native, 70% non-native. This is the garden as it transforms. We are now 40 to 45% native, about 60% non-native. Again, work in progress. So let's talk a little bit now that we've talked about that, about how to wildscape, how to do this in a way that won't off-put your neighbors and that also we can all, I mean, I work full-time. I know a lot of us do. So how can we balance that with work and do it in an intelligent fashion? So I've done this as 10 tips. Some of them I'll spend more time, others not. Tip number 1, know your rights. By the way, is my speed okay? You know, I get excited and I'm a fast talker like a Seinfeld episode. I'm a fast talker, so just let me know. So the most important thing is you got to begin the begin at the beginning. You got to check your deed restrictions. I'm lucky, mine are not that restrictive. The worst thing is you put stuff in and you got to rip it out. Check your ordinances too. You can go onto your city's website, but That's all I'll say on that. So tip number 2 is be friendly and considerate. So this is what I mean. It's basically wildscaping is a good neighbor. Backing up more broadly than wildscaping, I would say that we all, and I need to do a better job of it too, need to get to know our neighbors. So we all know the people who live right around us, right? But do we know the people at the end of the block and over on that side of the street? So, you know, people are not a means to an end, they're an end in themselves. So human relationships and making friends is worthy no matter what you do. But it has a couple of consequences to it that are really helpful if you're wildscaping. The first is that people who know you and like you already and you're friendly with, you have a human connection with, tend to be more flexible when you start changing up your landscape. Like, they'll cut you some slack. Our neighbors are awesome. You know, when they move in, we give them welcome baskets and bake cookies, and we have coffee together, and we chat outside when we're gardening. So get to know them, and they'll trust you as you wildscape. The second consequence is, I consider each of us who wildscapes to be an ambassador. My husband calls it evangelizing without proselytizing, right? You teach by doing. You don't shove it down people's throats or shake your fingers, right? So if you know people, then when cool things happen in your garden, you can invite them over. And they love to explore, and then they become invested in it. And they see the value. So, as a human being, get to know your neighbors. The second tip is, part of this is keep folks informed. And I do this, when I say folks, I mean people in your neighborhood or your local community. So we don't do it formally, we just do it informally. And I do it at 2 points. I did it first when we first started transforming our gardens into wildscape. Now, you're not going to rip up all of your yard, you're going to do it bit by bit. But it's true that when we wildscape, it looks different from the traditional manicured lawn and garden. And different can be scary. So what we did at the beginning, just over coffee or hanging out over the fence, is explain what we were doing, and they got excited about it. So again, it's that communication. The second point in time is when cool stuff happens in your garden. So we have a lot of young kids on our block, and we've gotten to know their parents. We don't have kids, but we're auntie and uncle, Lauren and Ian, to the kids, right? And so whenever we have a new batch of caterpillars hatch, or one is pupating, or you know, we've got a nest of such and such, I text the parents and they bring the kids over. Man, kids love bugs. So what you're doing is evangelizing without proselytizing. You're sharing that love, you're sharing that joy. So that's another way to keep folks informed. The other thing is, I'd say, give your garden character. Now, we don't go nuts and install, you know, the orange show is magnificent, but my neighbors probably don't want it next door, right? So we use common sense and reason, but whatever character means to you, and vive la différence, we are all different, make it so. So incorporate, besides plants, some hardscaping or art. So what you can see in the upper left corner is, thanks to Joshua's, I'll have to say there, this is an old farm blade, soil tilling thing. So we've incorporated that as a piece of art. This is our passion vine. And here we found there was nothing on this wall, so to be a good neighbor, we put in old windows and little window boxes and a trellis. And then I'm kind of a funky folk art kind of gal, so as I get older, the more I want to glue stuff on stuff, right? So I invited my friends over for my birthday, because that's how we roll at Shea Simpson, and we mosaic the top of a cinder block raised bed. Like, how cool is that, right? So I'm just saying. So whatever it means to you, do it, but just do it in moderation. And then finally, I have Jaime Gonzalez to thank for this. Wow. Last year was my first Wildscapes Workshop. Man, that was awesome. And Jaime got up there and he said, whatever else you do, make it look intentional. So if you're in a park or a field or a roadside, then kind of crazy, everything all mixed up is totally cool. I love spaces like that. I'm a naturalist. But your neighbors, and it's not really as appropriate in a suburban neighborhood, an urban neighborhood. So make it look like you've thought it out. What does that mean? Look at number 2 and number 3. I use discrete beds. I don't just rip out the soil and throw a bunch of stuff in. I use discrete beds, and I kind of plant in mounds of color and species. It looks intentional. You can also border the beds with traditional bordering, or I've even seen people take empty beer bottles, turn them upside down, and shove them in. What? That's so cool, right? Okay. The other thing is, I have here, keep grass in check, trim regularly, and weed as needed. So let's talk about that, because remember, what is the point of your wildscape? To support wildlife. But you have to do it in a way, as an ambassador, that won't turn off your neighbors, right? So you can't let the grass get like this, and besides, the city won't let you. But you might let it get like this, because look, gas mowers pollute more than driving in a car for multiple miles, right? Blowers do too. Electric mowers are better, and push mowers are better still, but dude, push mower in Houston when it's 105? No thank you. Okay, so, except maybe trimming. We do have one, actually. So keep grass in check. The thing you have to weigh against that is pollution, and also, especially in the early spring, sometimes dandelions and little weed flowers are the only thing that pollinators have to feed on. So if there's nothing else in your garden for them to feed on, don't mow every week. And again, that human connection, we let our neighbors know that we don't mow every week. So in the heavy growing season, it's maybe every other week, and then in dormant season, every 4 to 5 weeks. But if it gets crazy, we cut it back because we don't want to win the battle and lose the war. So trim regularly and weed as needed. Again, weed, but use your common sense. Don't rip out all those dandelions when that's the only thing there. And by the way, I have a candlestick cassia, not a native, but it's a host plant for sulfur butterflies. They're caterpillars. It is now over the roof. That's nuts. I should be cutting it back, but they're laying eggs on it. So I'm going to wait till the breeding season is over, later in the fall, then I'll hack it back. But what do I do in the interim? Good neighbor, talk to my neighbors about it. We even kind of make a joke of it. Does that make sense? So make it look intentional, follow the Gonzalez way. Okay, support the home team. By this I mean plant natives as much as you can. Now, how many are Native Plant Society members? Raise your hand. Okay, so I was not when I came, and I needed to hear this, so preaching to some in the choir, but it's always kind of a good, review, and it's good for people who have not heard it before. So to the extent that we can, and to the extent that it's possible, then we should prefer planting native plants. I mean, not just native to Texas, but to our eco-region. And there are a few, we could do a whole seminar on this, short and sweet. First, they've co-evolved with the pollinators here over millennia. So the pollinators, they have evolved to have shapes that fit the mouth parts of the particular pollinators that mainly pollinate them. Hugely important. Also, nectar is not just sugar water. It has certain nutrients in it. And so because critters and plants have co-evolved, they've come to depend on those nutrients. So you give them, something that's a hybrid or from the north of the United States here in Texas, they may not go to it, and even if they do go to it, because they do, it may not give them everything they need. The second is that some pollinators are specialists, so some bees in particular will feed only on the flowers of particular families or a particular genus or a particular species. And then pollinators tend to prefer them, but not exclusively. So I have them feeding on, for example, Salvia leucantha, which is a Mexican bush sage. It's not native, but they really like my Gaillardia pulchella, my Indian blanket, man. So in my experience, they're starting now, as I get more natives, to go to those more frequently. And they're also, just on an economic level, they're usually cheaper to maintain because they're adapted to our climate. They're used to being nuked and then drowned. I mean, this is how it is. So they have a better survival chance, right? So because of time, I'm not going to explain everything here that's in our garden, but I wanted to show you some pretty pictures because pretty pictures are fun. I'm going to show you some pictures of critters feeding on some of our most popular native varieties. So Rudbeckia species, coneflowers. We have some back there, Rudbeckia texana, I think, and some others. Can't go wrong. Greg's mistflower. So this I'll say one thing about, it's a fall bloomer, and sometimes we don't have a lot of flowers in the fall. You can't kill it, it takes full sun, and here's the other secret that I didn't know. There's a chemical in the nectar that, this mistflower, maybe others, that monarchs and queen butterflies, the males use for the pheromone pouches to attract females. This thing blooms at its height as they're migrating to Mexico. I remember seeing at least a dozen on a small patch at one time last year. So this is a great one. Indian blanket, we have some back there. Hugely popular with bees, even more so than butterflies. I'm sorry, did you get to look at the pretties? I mean, seriously. TV, no chance. Salvia coccinea, scarlet sage, scarlet salvia, Texas sage, I think Texas sage. This is the gift that keeps on giving. You can't kill it, it propagates. But you can see even bees go to it, and they'll sometimes puncture the base and nectar rob. But it's really good. And then this is the one I want to talk about, frog fruit, Phyllonotiflora. There's some back there. I actually have some that we're pulling up right now for creating a path. And if you get in touch with me afterwards and live locally, I can share some with you. I mean, for reals and for truths, okay? But the stuff back there, this stuff's great. I've documented well over 20 species of different pollinators who've come to this little flower. Ground cover, flower spikes about up to here, and it's the host plant for 3 butterfly species caterpillars locally. Can't kill it. Part shade, full sun, moist, dry. And then, of course, purple cone flowers. You can see a bumblebee in the top left, really enjoying the nectar. Tip 4, mix it up. So you saw the number and breadth of pollinators at the beginning of my talk, right? The key is to vary the plants in multiple ways throughout your garden so that you capture as many of them, attract as many of them as possible. You could research to see what plants attract which species of which order of animal, or you could just plant a bunch of stuff, guilty as charged, and they'll come to it. So let's talk about the ways in which we can vary. Size. Big flowers, small ones, like frog fruit. Why? Because some pollinators are big, like bumblebees and monarchs, and some are small, like those little hair streaks and those teeny little bees. Flower color was something I didn't realize should be varied. The reason for this is that not every insect or animal sees the full range of color. Bees, for example, can't really distinguish green from red. So red doesn't tend to attract them as much as purple, yellow, and white. Moreover, they can see this ultraviolet range that we can't see. Now, how cool is that, right? Butterflies and hummingbirds, in contrast, really like red among other colors. So again, you could research what colors attract what if you really wanted to, or plant a bunch of colors. You also want to choose flowers with different structures. The reason for this, very simply, is that different pollinators have different mouth parts and methods of feeding. Flies tend to have spongy, shallow mouth parts, so they need shallower flowers so that they can get the nectar reward and get to the pollen. Bees have tongues, but not all of their tongues are the same. Bumblebees have long tongues and can get down into different structures better than some of the others. In fact, I've seen them feeding on tubular flowers, shockingly. And then hummingbirds, a lot of things like butterflies and bees need to have a perch on the plant to land on, and then they feed. But hummingbirds levitate in the air. They hover. So you want to have different structures. So in our garden, we have 3 main classes of structure. The first are composite flowers, and you see some examples: coneflower, daisy, and blanket flower. So composite flowers have the big petals on the outside, and the central mound is really a mass of a bunch of teeny little flowers, each with its own nectar reward and pollen. So the beauty of this, we find that a lot of bees go here, and even those hoverflies I was telling you about like it, because their mouth parts can get into those teeny little flowers in the center. Plus, it gives a landing pad for those critters that need a place to perch. Then there are umbelliform flowers, which until the Texas Pollinator Powwow that I attended in April, I was like, the what, and the what? Like, that's a thing? So I think of umbelliform sounds like an umbrella, and so this is how I remember what it is. Umbelliform flowers have a single central stalk that comes up from the root, and then they branch out into smaller stalks that have flowers at the head of them, or more stalks with flowers. So it's like when you're in the wind outside and you got your umbrella on a stormy day and it blows backwards, umbelliform. Umbrella form. Okay, that's how I remember it. So examples you see on the right, that's a dill plant, and that is a hoverfly. It looks like a dragonfly, doesn't it? You know what she's doing? She's laying eggs on it. And her larvae will eat the aphids and other things that were on that plant. And then she pollinates. How cool is that? And then, of course, the Gregg's mistflower and all milkweeds are also umbelliform. And by the way, Randy Johnson, who's at the Dallas Zoo, who's awesome and spoke at the powwow, says that hoverflies really like the umbelliform flowers in his garden because their flowers tend to be shallow. And then tubular flowers, things like salvias, acanthus varieties, and Turk's cap is great. You see here a hoverfly on the left and a little teeny tiny hair streak on the right. Now she can perch and feed, but really this is for things like especially hummingbirds. They love these. So mix it up with structures. Does that make sense? Mix it up for the seasons. So the worst thing is you get a bunch of critters coming and you have lots of flowers in late spring and summer and early fall. And then nothing, nothing, nothing at all, for example, in the early spring when bees hatch and they're hungry. So what you need to do as you pick flowers is not only think about soil type and moisture and so on and whether it's native or not, but think about when it blooms. And what you want is to have a sequence. So this flower may not, like the Gregg's mistflower, won't bloom except in the summer and fall, but by gum, when it blooms when other things are not blooming at all. So there's always something on the buffet table as you go through the year. So, tip 5, pile it up. What do I mean by this? So even though we need to have variety, like we just talked about in tip 4, we also need to plant clusters of the same species or of color. 15? You're doing okay on time? Great. And it's not too fast? I would not make a Seinfeld episode these days. Okay. So we plant in mounds. So what you can see here is that you can see here, this is not a native, this is Copper Canyon daisy. I forget the Latin name. But it blooms in the fall and it's a huge bush. Here is Indian blanket, Gaillardia pulchella, which they have on the table back there. Awesome plant. This is Gregg's mistflower. Again, remember, taken in the spring. It doesn't bloom in the spring. And back here is a hybrid verbena, I think, that eventually, when it dries up and goes away, we'll replace it with something else. So, see how they're in mounds. The thing is that certain species like butterflies, certain families or orders of pollinators are more attracted to big bunches of color. They won't see it if you have one here and one there and one there. So plant them in bunches, at least bunches of color, because remember, different species, different critters are attracted to different colors. But I would say plant them with, I think one of the resources I gave you on the handout said 5 to 7. Ideally, you don't do that right away. You get one plant, right? Because we didn't win the lottery yesterday, so we get one plant, we harvest the seeds, and it propagates. But eventually, you want clusters of around 5 flowers at least of the same variety, the same species, because also some critters like bees practice what's called flower constancy. That is, they like to do one-stop shopping on the same species of flower. So they want to land and be able to feed not just on 2 flower heads, but on 20 of them. But they want to stick with that same species. See, that's what makes them good pollinators. I think I heard Michael Eckenfeld speak before at the Arboretum, and I think he said that honeybees, for example, will tell the other worker bees in the hive, they'll communicate where the good stuff is, and then they'll focus on those plants. That's why they're particularly good pollinators. So, mound it up. And this is embrace imperfection. So, I am one with the fact that my garden doesn't look perfect. That candlestick cassia has wood beams with a shirt wrapped around it that prop it up. It is not aesthetically pleasing, but it's for only a few more months, and there's a reason for it. So wildscapes, no matter how intentional you make them look, by putting them in beds and putting paths around them and artwork in, are gonna look a little wild. So embrace that imperfection. So my first tip to you is something that my bee-loving friends, some of whom are attending, told me to do. And that is, in the fall, when you have those plants with hollow or pithy stems, on the right you see, I think that was dill stems. I don't know what those are. But when you have those, what I used to do was, in the fall and early spring, like early spring, a month before I planted, I thought they were ugly, so I'd hack them down and compost them. But what I was doing unknowingly was perhaps composting baby bees. So about 30% of our native bees, and by the way, only bumblebees are colonial, meaning that only bumblebees, like the honeybees, live in communities like hives. They live in nests in the ground. Honeybees, non-natives, live in hives. Native bees are by and large solitary bees. They nest in these little tunnels in various surfaces or things. About 30% of them nest by digging holes in wood. Carpenter bees do that. And by the way, they won't hurt your house. They just be one with it. Embrace imperfection, right? And then they also nest the teeny, like the small carpenter bees. That's actually a thing, a small carpenter bee. They'll dig out the pith. You can actually see the pith on the edge. They'll dig it out and lay their eggs sequentially. Egg, pollen, egg, pollen, egg, pollen. And some of the species in the south where we are, because of the warmer climate, you could have a couple generations a year. I think I'm right in saying that a lot hatch in early spring. Michael, Kimberly, whoever else is here. So when you have these, what I do when the plants are dead is I leave about 6 inches of the stem. And what you really can't see very well is on the left stem, on the right-hand side, I've got a little anole, a little brown lizard. They love vertical structures to hunt. They hunt on those. So it's a twofer. And if you don't like where it looks and how it looks where it is, then uproot it and put it in a place where it won't be disturbed. But let those bees live. Don't compost them. They also sometimes will go into the empty stems in the winter because it's cold. So don't take away their home. Also leave some leaf litter. Now you don't have to leave it on your grass. You could mow over it and let it mulch. That's cool. But you could also, we compost with it because we constantly need brown matter. But in the garden beds, we leave it. And here's why. And actually, it becomes our mulch. Because in the winter, a lot of critters, toads, frogs, I read even some birds, I don't know which, and definitely insects burrow under that and hide during the winter. And also, as it decomposes, it will act as a nutrient for your soil. So be one with it and leave it, except in what I'm going to talk about in a second. This is just my personal opinion. So how many of us in past have squished aphids, those little yellow oleander aphids, or blown them off with water? Okay, mea culpa, okay, maxima culpa, all right, Catholic girl, all right. So it's your preference. I have learned, though, from hearing people like Randy Johnson again speak, that when you have aphids, yeah, you don't want them on your plants, but pretty much they're not going to kill the milkweed unless it's a horrible, horrible infestation. And the thing is, they emit this secretion called honeydew. It's a sugary thing, and that attracts insects that feed on them. We use no pesticides, even green ones, in our gardens because of these critters. What you see in the upper pictures here, the little green thing that looks like a sluggy caterpillar, and this guy like a teardrop blob caterpillar, those are the larvae of 2 different species of those hoverflies I was telling you about. So the hoverfly females are attracted to the honeydew that aphids put off, and they're attracted to mealybugs, whiteflies, all of that. They oviposit or lay their eggs among them, and these critters can, depending on the species, eat 200 to 400 aphids in their lifetime before they pupate. This is what the pupa looks like. It's called a puparium. Likewise, lady beetles, ladybugs. I found 7 species in our garden, including pink ones. What? That's a thing. How exciting, right? So this is the larva of one of those species, and you can see in its mouth is an aphid. The thing is, if I go squishing my aphids or blowing them off with water or wiping them off, guess what else I'm wiping off? Eggs of these guys. So what I have are cycles of a bunch of aphids, no aphids. Bunch of aphids, no aphids. But fantastic, I get pollinators when they grow to adults, the predators. And then let your herbs bolt. I have my friend Camille Lohman to thank for that phrase, right? Herbs feed us, and they may not be native, but gosh, they're yummy. The thing is, their flowers feed a lot of critters. Again, this is one of those base-banded furrow bees. Look how tiny. They love this because it's their size. And wasps, how beautiful are those, right? These are pollinating wasps that feed only on nectar or pollen. And this is an African blue basil. It is a hybrid. Of course, it's not we don't have any native basils, right? It's not only delicious, but you don't have to deadhead it to promote growth, but even if I did, I wouldn't. This is the most popular source of food in our gardens right now. Number 7, stock the nursery. Leave some bare ground. It should be sunny, loose soil that you don't touch. Something that's well drained. This is a female sweat bee. She made a nest in the ground. So 70% of our native bees nest by burrowing in the ground. And I happened to be there in the garden when she came out. How cool. So that's her emerging from her nest. Again, egg pollen, egg pollen. You can also, if you feel like it, add in a bee hotel. On your resources handbook, I give you links to places that explain it. The Hubs made that one. We took an old trunk piece from someone's yard when they were cutting down a tree and drilled holes. And you can also buy stuff. I wanted to point out that just this week, I found a little pollinating wasp, the female going in to tend her nest. So there are instructions in the handout. And the other thing is, don't have just food for the adult insect pollinators. Have plants that their larvae can feed on, especially for butterflies. These are all species from our garden. And what my tip to you would be not doing what I did. I have a little bed that I call Caterpillar Corner, because cute. And it has all kinds of these host plants. We call them host plants for these butterfly larvae, but the predators found it. So I would mix them up. And the good thing about putting food source for the adults by food source for the larvae is that the adults come to eat and they stay to lay their eggs. Accept the circle of life. I accept predators. Our gardens, too, are meant to be more of a classroom because I use it as an educational moment, and we also participate in, right now we're participating in a monarch study. But I'm one with it. And if I want to protect my garden, butterfly larvae from predators, you know what I can do? Bring them into a habitat. So this is just my 2 cents. But because of this, I will never have to use pesticides in our garden, ever. And in your resource, you'll see links to articles on how to attract these beneficial predators. Stay chemical free. Again, pesticides are equal opportunity killers. And then finally, share the love. I'll spend the last few minutes on this. So again, we're ambassadors. It's evangelizing without proselytizing. So how do we do that? The first thing is hold events. So we did Catholic girl. We did a garden blessing and seed sharing, and so neighbors came, friends came, and their kids came. Kids who were scared of bees are no longer scared of bees. And they got to hold caterpillars. What? Totally fun. We also had a Cub Scout class there, and we talked about composting and how to plant herbs. It was really cool. So invite people in to do whatever it is you like doing. Spread the word. So again, tip of the hat to Jaime Gonzalez. He said, put up a sign. Now, check your deed restrictions. Mine allow it. So the Hubs made me a sign, just like a realtor sign. And I put up our plaques, and on the top left, I'm going to put St. Julian's Crossing. But look what I've done on the right. I've got one of those little flip things, and in it, this is the handout, is this flyer. It says short and sweet, why we do it, what we do, how to do it, and gives resources. And when new neighbors move in and we give them those cookies and the welcome basket, we hand them one of these. So you can use social media. It can be as easy as a tweet, like a lot of you are doing now, or Instagram, or you can just throw things up on your home page on Facebook. But you can also start a community. So I started, because teacher, an educational Facebook community called St. Julian's Crossing Wildlife Habitat. You have the URL to it. So I will write articles. Sometimes I'll repost articles. I think I've reposted most of the resources that you have on the handout. And I put up my pictures. Why? Because people like pretty things. So show them what can come of a wildscape. And then get to know people in your local community. Join groups, share. So I can't tell you how many times the folks in our local garden throw up a thing that says, hey, I've got Salvia coccinea, whoever wants it, swing by. So we do that too, we share those. And by doing that, people come over and they learn. They take a flyer, they have fun. And then do this. It doesn't have to be this, because we're all different. Some people get into this kind of public talking. Other people, it's writing. Write a piece. So I think for the Butterfly Gardener magazine, for NABA, I'm gonna do a short article after this, because I need to sleep, right? On how to use social media to communicate about your butterfly garden. And then if you, is it time? Okay, and then plug iNaturalist, Nature's Notebook. I am now up to over 3,300 observations since January that I posted on here. But I'm doing a daily catalog of all the invertebrates I see as a baseline, right? And that, you don't have to do, seriously, don't do that. It's obsessive. But I do that so that we can compare it after a calendar year and use it as a baseline. Also, 4 researchers have contacted us now to get specimens or use pictures from the garden. And then just have fun. Okay, so we are right on time. How do you want to do questions and answers?
We want people. Fire ants, I haven't found anything to kill them, and they do take over some of the plants. And I don't know if you have a suggestion. Even the things that aren't supposed to, they're supposed to be natural. Those don't work that I found. So I just had a question.
So the best thing that I have found, and you know, again, I've just made this policy of no pesticides at all. So the best thing that I have found is elbow grease. So basically I go out there with boots on and gloves. I dig up the ground. I drown them. And if it's not in a bed with lots of roots around it, I pour boiling water on them. I mean, so if you have to get rid of them, do. I mean, sometimes you have to, it's a safety issue, like if you have children, for example. But that's how I do it, and it's labor intensive and takes multiple days, but I found that works better than a lot of the, you know, suggested remedies that are non-taught. That's just my personal experience.